Hello and welcome to this session. This is Professor Farhat, in which we will keep working at the SOC engagement. At this point, we have arrived to the review, the outcome of the procedures. In the prior session, we identified the risks and we assessed the risk and how we respond to these risks. We looked at the system description, whether it's a SOC 1 or a SOC 2. We looked at the suitability of the design, and this could be type 1 or type 2. For type 2, it's for a period of time, and we collected evidence about the effectiveness of the control. This is only a type 2 when we collect evidence to test the effectiveness of the control. And throughout these steps, learning about the description, learning about the control suitability and the effectiveness of the control, we collected evidence. In this session, we are going to review the outcome of the evidence, the outcome of the procedures that we conducted in the previous steps. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we proceed any further, I have a public announcement about my company, farhatlectures.com.
Farhat Accounting Lectures is a supplemental educational tool that's going to help you with your CPA exam preparation as well as your accounting courses. My CPA material is aligned with your CPA review course such as Becker, Roger, Wiley, Gleam, Miles. My accounting courses are aligned with your accounting courses broken down by chapter and topics. My resources consist of lectures, multiple choice questions, true-false questions, as well as exercises. Go ahead, start your free trial today.
Evaluating the evidence. So that's the topic of this session, is how do we evaluate the evidence. Now, bear in mind that the service auditor is responsible for making sure that their report and opinion are well supported by evidence. Why? Because you collect evidence to make a decision, to make a judgment. So this involves a thorough review and collection of data relevant to the audit that we are conducting. So that's the first point you need to know. Why do we need to evaluate evidence? Because the evidence will be the base for our decision. And when we look at the evidence, we must look at all information that's relevant from various sources, whether it's internal to the company or external to the company. And this helps provide a comprehensive view of the situation being audited. Why? Because you want information that support, like external information that support internal information, or conflict with the internal information, because you want to know what's happening. So you want to use both internal and external. It's also important for the auditor to consider all type of evidence, including those that agree with and those that challenge the management assertion. And the one that challenges, it's even more important, because this is what we need to be aware of. The risk is there are certain evidence that don't agree with management assertion. This balanced approach helps the auditor in making a proper and fair assessment. And also, if an evidence is missing for one reason or another, if there's a lack of information, this could be an important piece of evidence by itself. Why? Because the absence of evidence might indicate issues of non-compliance or operational efficiencies or incompetencies. So we need to know what's the impact when we are lacking evidence in a particular area. And also, the auditor must use their professional judgment at the end of the day to determine whether the evidence collected is both sufficient in quantity, enough, and appropriate, means relevant and reliable for supporting their conclusion. So, if the evidence does not meet these criteria, well, what we have to do additional investigative procedures to conduct further evidence gathering to support our conclusion if we don't have sufficient and appropriate evidence. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at how to evaluate the evidence. Okay, we have a piece of evidence. How do we look at this piece of evidence? Evaluating the evidence. So in the course of evaluating the results of the audit procedures, we must examine the nature and the causes. So what type of evidence are we looking at? What type of deviation, and what's the cause of that deviation? That we discovered in the description and the deficiency of the controls and the deficiency of the effectiveness of the control. Any deviation, any misstatement, whether it's in the description, suitability of the control, or control effectiveness, will have to be evaluated based on nature and causes. Starting with misstatement. If an audit find a description that don't meet the required criteria, such as accuracy or completeness, or it could lead the reader, the auditor must consider modifying their opinion. Yes, if we find something that don't meet the required criteria, we might have to modify the opinion. For example, a service organization describes in its SOC 2 report that all customer data is stored in an encrypted form. However, upon inspection, the auditor finds that certain older databases do not use encryption due to legacy system constraint. Well, this misstatement is misleading the users. About what? About the security of their data if not corrected in the auditor's opinion. Starting with misstatements and auditor's opinion. If an audit finds that description don't meet the required criteria, for example, such as accuracy or completeness, or it could lead users, the auditor must consider maybe modifying their opinion. For example, let's assume a service organization described in its SOC 2 report that all customer data is stored in encrypted form. Great. Upon inspection by the auditor finds that certain older databases do not use encryption due to the legacy system constraint. This misstatement could mislead users because you are saying that it's secure, but not all of it is secure. About the security of their data if not corrected in the auditor's opinion. So we have to ask the company, the service organization, either change their description or correct the issue. What happens if we find a deviation but it's within the acceptable range? Whether the deviation are within an acceptable range or constitute a significant deficiency makes a difference. What's an acceptable range? For example, we can accept 2%, 3% deviation, or 5 errors, or 1 or 2 incidents. That's an acceptable range. An organization has control procedures that require password changes every 90 days. The auditor observed that in a few cases the password change was completed within 95 days. The auditor determined that this slight deviation does not significantly impact the overall effectiveness of the control and it is within the acceptable range. So we have to see whether that deviation, the problem that we found, is it acceptable or not acceptable? If not acceptable, does it constitute a significant deficiency? If the deviation are within the acceptable range, it means, okay, that's not bad. Whether the performed procedures are adequate to conclude that the control are effective for the entire period. Now, remember, when we find a deviation, okay, but is this enough for the entire period? Because, okay, you found a deviation, it's within the acceptable range, but you're not looking at the whole period, so you have to be careful here. During SOC 2 engagement, the auditor finds that automated system for tracking failed attempt was temporarily offline for a week due to maintenance. Well, the auditor reviews the manual logs kept during this period and conclude that the alternative procedures was effective, thus the control was operational throughout the specified period. So you have to find out, okay, first, is it acceptable, and is it acceptable for a period of time? Because remember, in a SOC 2 Type 2 engagement, we're looking at a period of time. Also, we have to look at the impact of the identified deficiencies. Whether identified deficiencies are widespread enough to impact the achievement of the service organization commitment and system or requirement, or they are likely to affect only specific areas. So how widespread is the problem? Because at the end of the day, the service organization made a commitment or commitments, and they have a system requirement. Is this deficiency affecting their ability to deliver their commitment? Is it affecting their system? If the answer is yes, we have an issue. If they are likely to only influence certain areas, then we can live with that. An audit reveals that the backup power system, critical for ensuring system availability, has not been tested on a regular basis. This deficiency is likely to affect the organization commitment to system availability because you're promising that your system is available constantly if a power outage occurs, suggesting a significant risk that need to be addressed in the auditor's report. So simply put, if we see that it's not being tested, then it's a problem because system availability is one of those commitments. So the deficiency is in affecting the commitment, then it is a problem. Also, we can look at previously tested control. If previously tested control provides sufficient evidence of the effective operation or a further testing is necessary to evaluate the control throughout the period. For example, last year's SOC 2 report highlighted that firewalls were effectively protecting against unauthorized external access. This year, without significant changes to the network infrastructure or threat landscape, the auditor may decide that the previous testing of firewalls still provides sufficient evidence of their effectiveness. Simply put, what we're doing is we're relying on old reports. Again, we are making an assumption that the network infrastructure did not change and the threat landscape, there's no new threat, everything is under control, we're aware of everything. Then we might rely on previously tested controls. Otherwise, we really cannot. Limitation in applying additional procedures. If additional procedures cannot be applied, the reasons for this limitation might be considered to determine if it represents a deviation from the policy or a scope limitation of the engagement. So what we do is when we cannot find a way to test something, we might look at additional procedures. Now, if these additional procedures or alternative procedures cannot be applied, we have to know why. And if we cannot apply additional procedures to find out what's happening, we have to determine how is that deviation affecting the overall scope of the engagement. For example, if a significant portion of the organization data is processed and stored in a highly secure environment to which the auditor has limited access because of security policies, this could limit the scope of the audit. Then the auditor will have to find alternative ways to assess this. The auditor must then consider whether these restrictions prevent a complete assessment of data integrity control. Let's find an alternative way. If we still cannot, then we have to assess whether we're going to trust this or not, because really we cannot test it ourselves. So we have to determine based on that limitation. An impact of deficiency on commitment. That's important. Remember, you made commitments, and we found a deficiency. Is this deficiency influencing the commitment? Because this is our end product, is service the client based on that commitment. So the impact of deficiencies on the service organization and system requirement is critical. For example, if the auditor discovered that an organization incident response team has not been following the prescribed procedures for documenting and resolving security issues, well, this deficiency could undermine the organization commitment to confidentiality and integrity. It's clear cut that we committed to something and we're not doing, which would impact the trust among clients. So this is serious. Why? Because the deficiency itself, it's affecting your commitment, and that's serious, versus a deficiency that's minor or does not affect your service commitment or system requirements directly. Also, we have to decide whether the users of the report might be misled if the auditor opinion is not adjusted to reflect the deficiencies. So that's another thing we have to determine, whether we need to adjust the report or not. Suppose the service organization claimed to monitor all access to sensitive customer data, but the audit revealed that certain accesses are not logged. Well, if the auditor report does not highlight this deficiency, stakeholders might be misled about the robustness of the organization data privacy practices. So we have to determine whether we have to adjust anything in the opinion based on what? Based on the magnitude, based on the effect of the deficiency. So at the end of the day, it's a professional judgment. And that's why what we are doing here is evaluating the evidence. Also, what happens if we suspect fraud or non-compliance? We'll have to take into consideration any known or suspected fraud or non-compliance with laws and regulation. For example, during an audit, an auditor notices irregularities in the way user access is granted, suggesting potential non-compliance with established IT policies or even intentional misconduct. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to raise concern about fraud or violation of laws, which must be thoroughly investigated and reflected in the audit report, most likely. So we also have to look at this. Well, is there any consideration or any known or suspected fraud or non-compliance? We have to take that into account when we are evaluating the evidence. At the end of the day, we have to understand the nature and causes of any issue, because based on the nature and causes, we're going to have to adjust our opinion. If significant misstatement or deficiencies are found, especially those affecting the design, also the description or the operational effectiveness of the control in a type 2, the service auditor should modify the opinion accordingly. At the end of the day, the auditor will have to determine whether there is a problem with the description, with the suitability of control, or the effectiveness. Those three, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at those three things. If there's any issues, major deficiencies, then we might have to modify the report. Let's take a look at this multiple choice question from farhatlectures.com. An organization SOC 2 report incorrectly states that all data backup are encrypted when in fact only recent backup are. How should the auditor respond to this? Should they modify the auditor's opinion, disregard the misstatement, consider it trivial, validate the misstatement by testing all historical and current backup? Now, we're already told that the problem exists. All data backup are encrypted, but only recent one are the only one that have encryption. So, should we disregard the misstatement? I would say I would take out B, because this is a service commitment. This deals with security. We cannot disregard. Same thing, consider it trivial misstatement not requiring report modification. I would say B and C are taking it easy and we should not. It's a problem. So between A and D, validate the misstatement by testing all historical and current backup. You're already told what's happening, so we don't need to validate anything. Should we modify the auditor's opinion to reflect this misstatement? Yes. This is a problem. Security is a problem. It's one of those important criteria. Then it's affecting your service commitment. Therefore, the answer is A, modify the auditor's opinion to reflect this misstatement. What should you do now? You want to go to Farhat Lectures, look at additional MCQs. That's going to help you whether you're studying for your information systems and controls exam, some other professional certification. Invest in yourself. Good luck, study hard, and of course, stay safe.